Mildred Carson was a kind-hearted elderly woman who lived alone in a quiet neighborhood. At 72, she had a simple routine. Each morning, after finishing her tea, she would put on her favorite sun hat and take her dog, Rex, for a walk in the nearby park. It was her favorite part of the day, a time to enjoy the fresh air and the cheerful songs of birds. Rex, a large German shepherd, had been with her for 6 months. She had adopted him from the local shelter after feeling lonely following her husband's passing. From the moment they met, there was an instant connection. Rex seemed calm, wise, and obedient, as though he understood her without needing words. The park was peaceful that morning. The golden sunlight filtered through the trees, creating beautiful patterns on the ground. Mildred smiled as Rex walked beside her, his tail wagging happily. A few joggers and families passed by, some stopping to admire Rex. "What a beautiful dog you have," one woman said, and Mildred beamed with pride. But Mildred couldn't shake the feeling that Rex was different from any dog she had owned before. He responded quickly to commands, even those she hadn't trained him for. If she said, "Sit," he would sit instantly. If she said, "Stay," he froze in place like a statue. He seemed unusually alert, always watching everything around them, as though he was protecting her. As they reached the middle of the park, Rex stopped suddenly. His ears perked up, and he stared ahead. Mildred followed his gaze and saw 3 young men leaning against a tree near the path. They were talking loudly and laughing. Something about their presence made Mildred uneasy. She held Rex's leash a little tighter. "Come on, Rex," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Let's keep walking." Rex didn't move at first. His body was tense, and his sharp eyes stayed fixed on the men. After a moment, he let out a low growl, something Mildred had never heard from him before. "It's okay," she whispered, gently tugging his leash. Finally, Rex followed her, but he kept looking over his shoulder as they passed the group. The men noticed Mildred and started whispering among themselves. One of them pointed at her, and they laughed. Mildred's heart raced, but she tried to ignore them. Rex, however, seemed even more alert now. He walked slightly ahead of her, as if shielding her from danger. As they reached a bend in the path, Mildred glanced back and saw that the men were still watching her. They weren't following yet, but something about their behavior made her feel uneasy. "Maybe I should cut this walk short today," she thought. Little did Mildred know, this morning walk was about to change her life forever. Rex, her quiet and loyal companion, was not just any rescue dog. He was hiding a past filled with skills and training that would soon come to light in a way Mildred could never have imagined. With each step, she felt a mix of unease and trust in Rex's presence. He had been her protector in small ways since the day she brought him home. Now she was about to see just how extraordinary her companion truly was. Mildred tightened her grip on Rex's leash as she walked down the park's main path. The laughter from a group of young men still echoed in her ears. She tried to focus on the beauty of the morning, but her mind kept drifting back to their behavior. Something about them didn't feel right. Rex, however, seemed even more aware than usual. His ears twitched at every sound, and his sharp eyes scanned their surroundings constantly. Mildred couldn't help but feel reassured by his presence. "You're my brave boy, aren't you?" she said softly, patting his head. Rex responded with a small wag of his tail, but his gaze remained alert. As they approached a quieter section of the park, the atmosphere seemed to shift. Fewer people were around, and the trees cast long shadows on the ground. Mildred heard footsteps behind her, faint at first, but then growing louder. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the same 3 men from earlier. They weren't walking directly toward her, but their path seemed deliberate, as though they were trying to catch up. Mildred's heart began to race. She quickened her pace, hoping they would lose interest and leave her alone. "Hey, lady," one of the men called out. His voice was loud and confident, echoing in the empty space around them. Mildred didn't respond. She focused on walking faster, but her legs felt heavy. Rex's ears perked up at the sound of the man's voice. His body tensed, and he let out a low growl, so soft that only Mildred could hear it. "Don't ignore us," another man shouted, laughing. Their footsteps grew louder as they closed the distance. Mildred's breathing quickened, and she silently prayed for them to stop. Rex suddenly moved in front of her, his large frame blocking her from the approaching men. He planted his paws firmly on the ground, his stance strong and protective. Mildred could feel his energy shift. He wasn't just being a pet anymore. He was on high alert, ready for whatever might come next. The men finally caught up and stood a few feet away, smirking. "That's a big dog you've got there," one of them said, pointing at Rex. His tone was mocking, as though he didn't take Rex seriously. Mildred forced herself to stay calm. "He's friendly," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if that was entirely true right now. "Friendly, huh?" another man replied, stepping closer. "He doesn't look very friendly to me." Rex let out a deep bark, his teeth flashing briefly as he growled. The men hesitated, clearly surprised by the intensity of Rex's reaction. "Whoa, calm down," one of them said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We were just trying to say hello." Mildred felt her heart pounding in her chest. "We're just out for a walk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, let us go." The men exchanged glances, as if deciding what to do next. Rex, meanwhile, didn't move an inch. He stood firm, his eyes locked on the men, his growls low and steady. Mildred realized then that Rex wasn't just protecting her. He was ready to act if they made a wrong move. For a moment, the tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Mildred couldn't tell if the men would leave, or if this was just the beginning of something worse. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and held onto Rex's leash tightly. Little did she know, Rex's true capabilities were about to be revealed, and these men were in for a surprise they would never forget. The men didn't leave. Instead, they stayed where they were, watching Mildred and Rex with smirks that made her feel uneasy. One of them, a tall man with a baseball cap, stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "You don't have to be scared, lady," he said, his voice dripping with mock kindness. "We just want to talk." Mildred's grip on Rex's leash tightened. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hardly hear herself think. She took a step back, hoping they'd lose interest if she didn't engage. But the men weren't done. "What's in the bag?" one of them asked, pointing at the small purse Mildred had slung over her shoulder. "Anything good. It's just my things," Mildred replied, her voice shaky. "Please, leave us alone." The man in the baseball cap laughed. "We're not trying to rob you or anything," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Rex's growl grew louder, and his stance became even more rigid. He wasn't just standing protectively in front of Mildred. He was ready for action. His sharp eyes locked onto the men, and his body tensed like a coiled spring. "Calm your dog down," one of the men said, his voice less confident now. Mildred didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, and all she could do was hold tightly to Rex's leash. The third man, the shortest of the group, took a bold step forward. "Let's see if he's all bark and no bite," he said, laughing nervously. He reached out toward Rex, trying to test the dog's reaction. That was a mistake. In an instant, Rex lunged forward, barking so loudly it echoed through the park. His teeth bared, and his growl was deep and fierce. The man yelped and stumbled back, his laughter gone. "Whoa, what's wrong with that dog?" he shouted, holding up his hands. Rex didn't back down. He stayed in front of Mildred, his eyes darting between the three men. His growls were steady, his body poised to act if needed. The man in the baseball cap tried to regain control of the situation. "Relax, it's just a dog," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of fear. "Let's see if he's really tough." He grabbed a small branch from the ground and waved it toward Rex. But Rex didn't flinch. Instead, he moved with precision, dodging the branch and letting out another commanding bark. Mildred was frozen in place, shocked by Rex's reaction. She had always known he was protective, but this was something else. It was as if Rex had been trained for moments like this. The men began to back away slightly, their confidence fading. "He's crazy," one of them muttered. Mildred found her voice. "Please, just leave us alone," she said firmly, holding onto Rex's leash. The men hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do next. They had underestimated Rex, and now they were starting to realize their mistake. But the danger wasn't over yet. Mildred could sense it. She could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. And she knew, deep down, that Rex wasn't just any dog. Something about him was different, and soon she would find out exactly why. The tension in the air thickened, and Mildred could feel it deep in her chest. The three men had clearly underestimated Rex, and now they were unsure of what to do next. The man with the baseball cap lowered the stick he had been waving and took a cautious step back. But Rex didn't relax. He stayed in front of Mildred, his body firm and alert, his eyes still fixed on the men. His deep growl rumbled in the air, like a warning to anyone who dared get too close. Mildred had never seen Rex like this before. She had always known he was protective, but this was different. There was a power to him, a confidence that sent a chill down her spine. "Come on, man," one of the men muttered. "Just walk away. This isn't worth it." The man in the baseball cap didn't seem ready to back down, though. "Shut up," he snapped. "We've got this. Let's see if that dog's all talk." He took another step forward, trying to get closer to Mildred and Rex. The other men hung back, their eyes wide with uncertainty. Rex's growl grew louder, and without warning, he moved. It wasn't a random lunge. It was a precise, calculated move. He stepped to the side, then sprang forward like a coiled spring, his body moving with such speed and power that the men had no time to react. Before anyone could stop him, Rex knocked the baseball cap man to the ground with a single swift movement. He didn't bite or attack. He just used his strength to send him crashing into the dirt. The man let out a shocked yell as he tried to scramble to his feet. But Rex was already there, standing tall over him, eyes glowing with intensity. "Stay down," Mildred shouted, her voice shaking. She had no idea why she said that, but it felt like the right thing to do. Rex didn't move. He remained steady, his gaze never leaving the man who was now on the ground, visibly stunned. The other two men took a step back, looking terrified. "Get him off me," the man on the ground cried, scrambling away from Rex. Rex didn't chase him. He simply stood still, as if guarding Mildred from any further threat. For a moment, everything was quiet. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and Mildred could hear her own breath, fast and heavy, in the stillness. She realized then that the men were no longer the threat. It was Rex who held the power now. The other two men looked at each other, their fear evident. They slowly began to back away, hands raised in surrender. "We don't want any trouble," one of them said, his voice shaking. "We're leaving." Mildred didn't say a word. She simply watched as the men turned and quickly walked away, leaving her and Rex standing in the middle of the park. As the men disappeared around the corner, Rex finally relaxed. His growl stopped, and his body shifted back to its normal calm posture. Mildred took a deep breath, her heart still racing. She knelt down beside Rex and gently patted his head. "Good boy," she whispered, though her voice was filled with amazement. Rex responded by giving her a quick lick on the hand, as if to say, "I've got you." But Mildred was still in shock. She had always thought of Rex as a gentle companion, a loving dog who kept her company. She never imagined he could do what he just did. As she stood up and started walking again, she couldn't help but wonder, who was Rex really? What was his past? Whatever it was clear that Rex was more than just a dog, and Mildred had a feeling she was about to find out exactly what made him so extraordinary. After the men had fled, Mildred stood still for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. The park was peaceful again, the birds chirping in the trees as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Rex had just protected her in a way she couldn't have imagined. He wasn't just a regular dog, he was something more. Mildred gently tugged on his leash, leading him toward the park exit. "Let's go home, Rex," she whispered, still trying to process what had just occurred. As they walked, Mildred's mind raced. What had made Rex react like that? She had known him to be protective, but that kind of swift, powerful action, it was something different. It was almost as if he had been trained for moments like this. Back at home, Mildred couldn't shake the feeling that Rex was hiding something from her, something important. She had to know more. Sitting down at her kitchen table, she picked up the phone and dialed the number of the rescue shelter where she had adopted Rex. She had always been grateful for the shelter's help, but she needed answers now. "Hello, this is the Sunny Meadows Rescue Shelter," a kind voice answered. "Hi, this is Mildred Carson. I adopted a dog named Rex about 6 months ago. I'm wondering if you could tell me more about his background," Mildred asked, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "Of course, Mrs. Carson. I'll look up his file for you." The sound of typing filled the brief silence. "Ah, here it is. Rex was brought to us from a police K-9 unit in the city. He served for 8 years before being retired due to an injury." Mildred's heart skipped a beat. Rex had been a police dog. "I didn't know that," she said softly, feeling a mix of surprise and admiration. "Yes, he was highly trained in search and rescue, as well as protection and defense," the voice continued. "He was retired after a leg injury, but it didn't stop him from being a very capable dog. We thought he would do well in a home where he could still be active, but not in a high-pressure situation. It seems he's found the perfect place with you, Mrs. Carson." Mildred's mind was spinning. Rex had spent 8 years as a police dog, trained to defend, to protect, and to respond quickly in dangerous situations. No wonder he had acted so decisively when the men had attacked. "Is there anything else I should know?" Mildred asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Well, we did have a few behavioral specialists work with him during his recovery. He's a gentle dog, but his instincts for protection are very strong. It's likely that in moments of danger, those instincts just take over," the shelter worker explained. Mildred leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. She had thought Rex was just a loyal dog who kept her company, but now she realized he was so much more than that. He had been trained to protect people, to serve and defend in ways she had never imagined. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride and gratitude. Rex wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a hero. As she hung up the phone, Mildred smiled down at Rex, who was lying on the couch, his eyes half closed in contentment. He had already returned to his calm, gentle self, but now Mildred saw him in a new light. From that moment on, she knew that Rex wasn't just there to keep her company. He was there to protect her. And if anything ever threatened her again, she had no doubt that Rex would be ready. The following days after the park incident passed in a blur for Mildred. She was grateful for the quiet, but she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Rex had changed her perspective on the world. The dog she had adopted as a companion had proven to be far more than that. He had been trained for situations like the one they had faced, and his instincts had kept her safe. But Mildred still wondered, what if something like that happened again? What if the men returned? Or worse, what if they brought others with them? She couldn't be sure how Rex would handle another situation like that. Would he act the same way? Would he protect her again? One afternoon, as Mildred and Rex were walking through the park again, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She had hoped the incident would fade from her mind, but it seemed to linger like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Rex was walking calmly beside her, as he usually did. His tail wagged in time with his steps, and he seemed relaxed, his eyes scanning the surroundings but not with the same sharp alertness he had shown before. Mildred, on the other hand, felt tense, her eyes darting around every corner, every shadow. They reached the same quiet section of the park where the men had approached them days earlier. This time, the area was empty. There was no sign of anyone. But as they walked along the path, Mildred heard a sound that immediately made her heart race. Footsteps. Mildred turned to look, and her eyes widened in alarm. She saw two figures walking toward her in the distance. It was hard to tell at first, but as they drew closer, she realized who they were. It was the same men from the other day. Her heart skipped a beat. Her hand instinctively tightened on Rex's leash. The men didn't notice her at first, too busy laughing and talking among themselves. But Rex had already noticed them. His ears stood up straight, and his body stiffened. He was on high alert again, his eyes locked on the men. Mildred stopped in her tracks. She knew what was coming. Would Rex respond the same way he had before? Would he protect her again? The men finally saw them and froze. They stopped laughing. The mood shifted instantly. "Oh, it's you," one of the men said, his voice low and unsure. "The old lady with the crazy dog." Rex growled softly, his eyes narrowing. The men hesitated, clearly unsure of how to react. They had been too cocky the last time, but now, standing face to face with the dog they had tried to intimidate, they didn't know what to do. "You better get that thing under control," the man with the baseball cap said, taking a step back. "We don't want any trouble." Mildred didn't say anything. She just held Rex's leash tightly, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. Rex wasn't charging toward them. He wasn't acting aggressively. He was simply standing his ground, ready to protect her if needed. The men looked at each other, their bravado fading. They seemed to realize that Rex wasn't just any dog. He was trained to respond to threats, and they were the threat. "Yeah, we didn't mean any harm," the third man muttered, his voice shaky now. We're just passing through." Mildred nodded, but she didn't move. She wasn't about to let her guard down. She knew the men had learned their lesson, but she wasn't taking any chances. The men turned and walked away without saying another word. They didn't even look back, their steps quick and uneasy. Mildred stood there for a moment, still holding Rex's leash, before she sighed in relief. "You did it again, didn't you?" she whispered to Rex, who gave her a small wag of his tail. Rex had done more than just stand his ground. He had turned the tables completely. The men, once confident and brash, were now the ones who feared him. And for the second time, Rex had protected Mildred without hesitation. She smiled down at him, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. No one could ever make her feel unsafe again, not as long as she had Rex by her side. The park was peaceful again, the only sound now the rustling of the leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Mildred stood there for a moment, still holding Rex's leash, watching the men retreat into the distance. Her heart was racing, but not from fear. No, now it was the rush of relief and awe. Rex had once again kept her safe, but this time it felt different. There was no sense of danger lingering. She took a deep breath and turned to Rex. "You did it again, didn't you, boy?" she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Rex, ever calm, gave her a quick glance and a wag of his tail, as if to say, "Of course I did, Mildred. I always will." But for Mildred, this moment was more than just a simple walk in the park. She had learned that Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a protector. His training had been hidden from her until now, and it was becoming clear that Rex was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. As the men disappeared from view, Mildred felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that they wouldn't be back. Not after what had happened. They had seen for themselves just how serious Rex was, and the fear in their eyes had told her everything she needed to know. It wasn't just that they were scared of Rex. It was that they understood something important. They couldn't control the situation anymore. Rex had taken control. He had shifted the power, making them realize they were the ones in danger. Mildred continued walking, slowly, with Rex by her side. He kept a steady pace, his body relaxed, but still alert. She noticed how his eyes scanned their surroundings with precision, as if he was constantly aware of every movement in the park. It was a quiet vigilance that made her feel completely safe. She smiled at him. "You really are something special, aren't you?" Rex glanced up at her, his eyes warm and steady, as if he understood every word she was saying. As they neared the park exit, Mildred noticed a couple of people walking their dogs. She gave them a friendly smile, but her thoughts kept drifting back to what had just happened. The men had approached with bad intentions, but they had underestimated Rex, and, in turn, they had underestimated her. Rex had shown her that she didn't need to live in fear. She had a loyal companion, a protector, at her side. He had proved himself in the most difficult of circumstances, and now Mildred knew that she would never be alone again. The park, which had once felt like a peaceful escape, now felt like a place where she could relax without worry. It was a place where Rex's presence made all the difference. As they walked home together, Mildred's mind wandered back to the shelter. She had learned that Rex was a retired police dog, trained to respond to danger. It made sense now. His instincts were sharp, his skills honed, and his dedication to protecting her was unwavering. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for him. She had always wanted a dog, someone to share her life with, but Rex was more than just a companion. He was a hero. He had stepped into her life and filled it with a sense of safety and peace she hadn't realized was missing. By the time they reached her front door, Mildred knew one thing for sure. Rex was more than just a dog. He was family, and nothing would ever change that. The days that followed the park incident were quieter, but Mildred couldn't stop thinking about Rex. Every time she looked at him, she saw not just the gentle, loyal dog she had adopted, but something more, a protector, a hero. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to him than she had first realized. One evening, as she sat on her front porch with a cup of tea, she decided to find out more about Rex's past. She needed answers, and she was determined to uncover them. After she finished her tea, she took out her phone and dialed the rescue shelter again. This time, she was ready with more specific questions. "Hello, this is Sunny Meadows Rescue Shelter. How can I help you today?" the friendly voice answered. "Hi, this is Mildred Carson," she said. "I adopted a dog named Rex a few months ago. I was hoping you could tell me more about his time before he came to the shelter. I've been thinking about it a lot lately." There was a brief pause, and then the voice responded. "Of course, Mrs. Carson. Let me pull up his records for you." Mildred could hear the sound of typing as the person searched for Rex's file. "Ah, here we go," the voice continued. "Rex was with a police K-9 unit for 8 years. He was part of a special team trained in search and rescue, as well as protection. During his time with the police, he helped locate missing persons, apprehend suspects, and even assist in high-risk situations. He was highly trained and well-respected in the force." Mildred's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known the full extent of Rex's past, and now it was all starting to make sense. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "And why was he retired?" Mildred asked, eager to know more. "He was retired after an injury to his leg," the voice explained. "It wasn't a serious injury, but it was enough to require time off. The police decided it was best to retire him while he could still have a good life outside the force. That's when he came to us." Mildred felt a wave of gratitude and awe wash over her. Rex had been a true hero before he even came into her life. He had risked his life to help others, and now he was with her, quietly protecting her without ever asking for anything in return. "He's amazing," Mildred said softly. "I had no idea." "Yes," the voice agreed. "He's a remarkable dog. His instincts are still sharp, and he's always ready to protect. It seems that he's found a wonderful home with you, Mrs. Carson. You're lucky to have him." Mildred smiled at the words. She didn't feel lucky. She felt blessed. Rex had been her rock, her companion, and her protector. Now she understood just how deep that bond truly went. After the phone call, Mildred sat in silence for a while, reflecting on everything she had learned. She looked over at Rex, who was lying on the porch beside her, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You've been through so much, haven't you?" she whispered to him, her voice full of affection. "I'm so proud of you." Rex lifted his head at the sound of her voice and gave her a gentle wag of his tail. Mildred's heart swelled with love for him. She had always known that he was special, but now she understood just how much he had given to others before he even came into her life. And now he was giving her the most precious gift of all: safety, loyalty, and love. She leaned down and hugged him, grateful beyond words. Rex, as always, was right there, his strong presence reassuring her that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And with that thought, Mildred knew she was never alone. Rex would always be by her side. Weeks passed, and life in Mildred's home returned to a peaceful rhythm. She still thought about the men who had tried to harm her, but now it didn't feel as scary as it once had. With Rex by her side, she knew she could handle whatever came their way. Rex had proven time and time again that he wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a hero, and a loyal friend. One afternoon, as Mildred was out in the garden with Rex, she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands, and walked toward the front door. To her surprise, 2 police officers were standing there. "Good afternoon, ma'am," one of the officers said politely. "I'm Officer Davis, and this is Officer Harris. We're here about the incident in the park a few weeks ago. May we speak with you for a moment?" Mildred's heart skipped a beat. The men. She hadn't heard from the police since the day Rex had protected her. "Of course," she said, trying to remain calm. The officers stepped inside, and Mildred led them to the living room, where she sat down with them. Rex, ever watchful, remained standing by her side. "We wanted to thank you for your help in identifying the men who attacked you," Officer Davis began. "Your report, along with the witness statements, helped us track them down. They've been arrested." Mildred's heart raced as she listened. "Arrested? So they won't be able to hurt anyone else?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "That's right," Officer Harris said. "They've been charged with attempted robbery and assault. They were found with stolen goods in their possession. The evidence is clear, and they won't be able to cause any more trouble." Mildred felt a sense of relief wash over her. Justice was being served. The men who had tried to take away her peace had been caught, and they would face the consequences of their actions. "We also wanted to commend your dog, Rex," Officer Davis continued. "He did exactly what he was trained to do. His quick action and protective instincts were remarkable." Mildred smiled, looking at Rex, who was now sitting calmly at her feet. "He's always been a good boy," she said softly, her voice full of pride. "But I didn't know how much he had really been trained to do. I feel lucky to have him." The officers nodded. "It's clear that Rex is more than just a pet. He's a true hero," Officer Harris said. Mildred felt her heart swell with pride. She had always known Rex was special, but hearing it from the officers made her realize just how much he had given to the world before he came to her. He had served with honor, protecting people he didn't even know, and now he was doing the same for her. As the officers left, Mildred felt a deep sense of gratitude. She walked them to the door, watching as they got into their car and drove away. Turning back inside, she looked down at Rex, who had followed her to the door. "We did it, didn't we, boy?" she said, her voice full of love. Rex wagged his tail and gave her a gentle nudge with his nose, as if to say, "Of course we did. I'll always be here for you." Mildred sat down on the couch, and Rex hopped up beside her, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his fur, marveling at how much he had changed her life. No longer was she the lonely woman walking through the park, unsure of what might happen next. With Rex by her side, she was stronger, safer, and more confident than ever before. And as she sat there, with the sun setting outside and Rex snuggled close to her, Mildred knew one thing for sure. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, side by side. Because with Rex, she wasn't just safe, she was home.